How are we doing?
Okay, perfect. So what prompted the move up to Montana? It was a short trip to Texas. I think it was under 2 years, if I'm not mistaken.
Just a hair shy of 2 years. We really like Texas, but the hook didn't sink deep for our kids. And with the unknown nature of the world, Texas was about a 30-hour drive to family, and here we're only about an eight-hour drive to Idaho, and then a little longer than that to Reno, which is the rest of where our family lives. And when my kids found out that it snows in Texas like once every 30 years, they wanted to murder me and put me in a shallow grave. So literally, we showed up in Montana early March, and there was still 2 feet of snow on the ground. And the kids didn't come back inside for like 8 hours after that. Like they just sledded and made igloos and went crazy. So it was apparently we are mountain folk, not hill country folk, is what it all boiled down to.
Awesome, interesting. I'll just tell you, I lived in Galveston, Texas, and I actually, believe it or not, it snowed in Galveston, Texas on Christmas Day when I was there. It was like the first time in over 100 years I think they'd had that. And people were making snowmen on the beach, and it was quite a bizarre experience. I remember that distinctly. Sometimes it'll get a little cold and it'll get close to freezing, but it never had snowed before. But so Montana, I'm also newly moved. I'm up to rural Washington State, and this is for reasons of girlfriend's job and stuff like that. But so it's kind of interesting. A lot of people, for various reasons, would be envious of Montana and a few other places, Texas and other things, just based on sort of different political natures and freedoms that some people may cherish a little bit. And so interesting. We are living in a very interesting time now, Rob, as I'm sure you're aware. And anyway, I think it doesn't matter the time, health is important. And I know you and I have both been pushing get healthy, stay healthy message. And I think that's important. So why don't you just kind of share with me anything you've been talking about lately? I know you've been doing, I see your posts on some of the social media, and, you've kind of, changed a little bit of focus, I guess, maybe, but you're still plugging away and getting great information out to people. So what's the latest thing we need to be concerned with?
Oh man, I mean, I've said a lot within our community, the Healthy Rebellion community, much more vocal about things like the COVID topics and stuff like that. But we were very early in the cancel experience. I think I shared this with you. My website was part of the Google OWL update, which occurred in 2017. And we got up one morning and 97% of our site traffic had disappeared. Like all of the years of curated material we had generated, you could still find it, but like I did a very comprehensive review of the vegan film, What the Health. And there was a time when if somebody put What the Health in the search bar, my review was maybe the second or third search return, because of the link backs and, I guess the quality of the material, the volume of the material and all that type of stuff. And then when you got up that day, we went 50 pages deep and still couldn't find a link to the review. So we were really, really early in this kind of, cancel culture, suppress the, there've been some interesting observations lately, which is you don't really need to suppress lies, because lies ultimately end up getting exposed as lies via scrutiny over time. But if a certain truth doesn't jive with what the power structure wants, then you really do need to suppress that. But it's a hard thing to do. It's kind of a whack-a-mole game, Like, I think that's part of the reason why you created the community that you did, is kind of a hedge and a backstop against some of this risk exposure that we have, reaching out to people mainly on social media. But I've still been largely beating this drum around metabolic health. Like I think that we had a sense back in early March of 2020 that metabolic health was really important for, this potential, this then burgeoning coronavirus pandemic. But when we looked at influenza and just general, the metabolic diseases, we've known that metabolic health is this kind of linchpin. Like, it doesn't guarantee anything, but whatever situation we're going to face, whether it's crashing your car or catching an infectious disease, if you were stronger and healthier, you're going to have better outcomes than if you are less strong and less metabolically healthy. And so this has continued to be kind of the main thing that I talk about, more on the social media front. Every once in a while, I will try to put a little pinger out there about, maybe the inconsistencies in the way that I feel that this whole thing has been dealt with, and the real need for free, open discussion, and the very slippery slope that we could find ourselves in if we allow this marriage between government and tech platforms to really run wild in its ability to curate the discussion that we have. Like there are a lot of vegan folks out there that I don't particularly like, but I would be horrified if they were deplatformed. Like it would be really, really concerning to me. And I'm amazed by the breadth and depth of people that kind of give a shrug and well, that guy had it coming to him, just when somebody gets deplatformed, but they happen to have a position that was unpopular in someone else's eyes. So I guess that's been the bulk of the things I've been doing, on kind of the career front and trying to provide some value add to people. Mainly, I've been trying not to get my social media head cut off in this whole thing and just carve out some time for doing jiu-jitsu and hanging out with my family above and beyond everything else.
Yeah, they say that, I've heard that, you probably heard that sunlight is the best disinfectant. And so, when we censor things, we keep them in the dark, no one knows. And if you shine a light on that, it'll be exposed for what it is. And most reasonable people will say, hey, that's really stupid, or that's, or this person. And I agree. I mean, there's a guy, Vegan Gains, who apparently got canceled. And I put up a video saying, while I find his commentary generally abhorrent, he has a right to say that, and I don't think he should be censored or canceled for that. And people will make the decisions. But that's clearly not happening. We're seeing that and I also have to be mindful of what I say in certain places, and it's quite problematic that that's the case. Speaking of it, yeah, so I mentioned to you, I started jiu-jitsu as well, and that's something I actually had to take, as we move. I didn't have a location. I'm about to start that up back next week and hopefully get the whole family in there. There's a guy named Greg Anderson who's a really, you may be familiar with, a really interesting guy. Mm-hmm. He's former policeman from the Seattle Police Department. He's formed because he lost his job over not wanting to enforce mandates which he felt were unconstitutional, and stood up to that. And I think he's a solid individual for doing that. But let me ask you, so just regard to, in the metabolic health, and I think it's fine to talk about, we're in the midst of this pandemic. Some people are getting sick. Some people are, being vaccinated. Some people aren't. Some people are concerned about, if I'm vaccinated, I'm going to have a side effect. Can I mitigate that? How do I protect myself from an infectious disease? And again, this is not new stuff, Rob, as you know. I mean, as you mentioned, every single disease out there, every trauma out there, every infectious disease out there always has a worse outcome if you are metabolically unhealthy. That is since time immemorial. And, the fact that we have largely ignored that as a total response, to me, is just, it's almost criminal in my view. But for those people that care about this stuff and want to talk about it, and you and I do all the time, what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on what are the top few things I can do to try to shore up my, or kind of improve myself to prevent myself from these problems?
Yeah. And let's just really quickly mentioning that, like, do get vaccinated, don't get vaccinated. Like, I've had gut and autoimmune issues for 20 plus years. So like I had to get a vaccine for a tetanus booster before I did the I Caveman reality show. And I ended up with like this lymph gland infiltration. They thought I had lymphoma for a while. Like the immune system did not like this tetanus booster. And so personally, I'm a little nervous around would I do it? Wouldn't I do it? But when we look at the data, both on influenza vaccinations and other vaccinations, and also the early data that we had as early as last year or the beginning of this year, when the vaccines first started rolling out, it's crystal clear that people with better metabolic health have a better vaccine experience, to say nothing of if they catch the direct, infectious agent, they have a better outcome there. And, diet, sleep, and movement seem to be the biggies. And then also I would add the additional piece, community being these non-negotiable features of good metabolic health. The sleep part being maybe in my mind, the most important piece. And if I had my whole career to do over, I think I would be the sleep guy instead of the food guy. And then I would sell kind of keto, carnivore, paleo type diets as the solution to better sleep, and instead of kind of backing into it the opposite direction. Clearly good vitamin D levels are super important. Hopefully we get that mainly from being out in the sun, but we are I think we're 13 days away from the solstice or what have you, and so people in the northern latitudes are going to have some tough sledding getting enough vitamin D from those sources. But we, as you pointed out, we talk about these different features of metabolic health all the time, but lifting weights, I think, is one of these really underappreciated elements of metabolic health. Mark Ripito long ago cited some studies that made the case that even in folks that have pretty abysmal diets, consistent, like 3 times a week, full body resistance training, so improved insulin function and so nicely depleted glycogen stores that it became very, very difficult for these folks to even get to that peri-diabetic or pre-diabetic stage. And this was amidst an otherwise like excess calorie environment, clearly too many carbs, not great immunogenic foods, but just that process of really vigorous resistance training, full body, 2 or 3 times a week is so incredibly powerful for improving metabolic health and insulin sensitivity and whatnot. And doesn't need to take a lot of time. Like circuits and things like that can be really time effective. So 3 days a week, 30 minutes of resistance training as kind of a minimum effective dose, and then a lot of walking, and then something I suspect it looks like some sort of a carnivore-ish, keto-ish type approach is probably going to work remarkably well for a lot of folks. And if somebody has additional carb needs or a little bit different physiological parameters, I think using that as a beginning point and then tinkering from there to find where people optimize seems like a pretty reasonable and maybe not easy proposition, but it's something that we can say, well, we're going to experiment here, and if we see the improvements we want, then we're good, and if we don't, then we can modify elsewhere. So there's it's pretty simple. Like the fortunate or unfortunate thing is the things that work really, really well are super simple. Selling people on extended massive fasts and protein avoidance and all this other stuff seems pretty sexy, but I'm pretty underwhelmed with the results of that stuff. So my approach is pretty simple, pretty knuckle dragger.
I don't find avoiding protein to be very sexy myself personally. Hey, let me ask you about vitamin D, because it's gotten a lot of press lately. But one of my thoughts, and I think there's some evidence to back this up, maybe you looked in it a little more deeper, but we see that, low vitamin D levels often reflects poor metabolic health and not necessarily you haven't consumed enough of it. Maybe your body's just having difficulty running the system, so to speak, to process it, to convert it correctly. Do you see any relationship between that? Whereas, if you're, you can supplement, but if you're in this metabolically compromised situation, either through obesity, diabetes, or whatever have chronic inflammation, you're going to still get suboptimal return on that. Is there anything to validity to that?
Yeah. And I'm definitely not an expert on that. Like folks like Chris Kresser and Chris Masterjohn are much better steeped in that, but it definitely, there's a couple of different things that we will track biomarker wise that we may see low levels, and it's not necessarily that we have inadequate intake, but because of some other inflammatory processes, we're really burning through that stuff at a pretty high clip. And so this is where like some Dutch testing, where we're looking at both the upstream and the downstream metabolites of hormones, vitamins, some of these intermediary cofactors can help us dial in on maybe what's going on there. But also, if somebody just, we do a simple hip to waist measurement and the individual is still kind of more in that potentially insulin resistant state, but they've been supplementing, say, like 5,000 IUs a day of vitamin D, and folks should do some K2 along with that. D will cause us to retain calcium, but the K2 tells us where to put it. Like, you don't necessarily want that stuff, the calcium lining your arteries and hardening those up. We want the calcium to go to the appropriate spots, but we can kind of back into then, whether or not our inadequate relative D reserves are reflective of that poor metabolic state. Some people, as they age, seem to lose some capacity with converting sunlight into vitamin D. I think that is largely a metabolically driven process as well. When I did live in Texas, the one boon that we had is that there was barely a day I couldn't get outside and according to my D minder, make like 10 or 20,000 IUs of vitamin D. And I didn't supplement for 1 year. I just used sunlight as my D manufacturing method. And I got out virtually every day. I mean, there were a few days here or there that it might be rainy, and then we had the snowpocalypse. So there was a period of time where I couldn't get out there. But that was the highest vitamin D levels I've ever had in my life. It was at 85 when I had it checked. And I'll be 50 in January. And in theory, like, my capacity to make vitamin D from, a photosynthetic effect is supposed to be like 50% of what it was in my youth, but like, I was crushing it. And so I think that as with so many other things, like vision loss, hearing loss, sarcopenia, that seems to be so reflective of just a diet and lifestyle at odds with our basic genetics, and not something that is baked into the biological clock. So I think, again, this kind of becomes very chicken and egg. Like, you want some higher vitamin D levels because it fosters better immune function and metabolic health, but yet we really need to goose all the diet and lifestyle features to have good metabolic health to then get the most out of the vitamin D. And I think that this is also the power of really I think the kind of holistic approaches that I think both of us recommend. You can't just supplement your way out of a bad diet. You can't usually just exercise your way out of a bad diet. But then, diet absent good circadian entrainment and community and whatnot is also not going to fill the full bill. So we really do need to tick all the boxes. And sometimes, like, when we do 3 resets a year within the Healthy Rebellion, and we tend to pick an area of focus. So maybe it's diet this time, maybe it's movement this time, maybe it's community this time, which seems kind of wacky. But in that first run up in the COVID pandemic, most folks picked community as the thing they were going to focus on, and we had to get super creative to figure out what actually ticked the box of community so that you didn't feel like you were living in some sort of a solitary confinement kind of scenario. But it really helped people to identify where they felt like they were the most deficient in these areas, and then focus on that to bring it up and make it stronger.
Yeah, I want to just, so, I mean, I think the White House today is going to announce a new set of Chris Masterson was commenting on this about how they're going to change society. And I guess Jen Psaki has asked, well, what does that mean for the average American? It says, well, it really depends upon your vaccination status. And so interesting to see what sort of national mandates are going to come down. I suspect there are going to be a lot of people that are not going to like them. I would assume. Do you find, okay, and you just identified yourself as someone who, for various reasons says vaccination may not be the best choice for me. I'm in a low risk category. I take care of my health. I exercise. I do the things that most people aren't doing. And, because, when you go outside, I don't know, I haven't been to Montana lately. I was there a couple of years ago, but when I go outside in Washington State and I go to, say, the store, I mean, the number of people that are obese is phenomenal. I mean, none of these people are in good metabolic health. And so for the vast majority of these people, some of these things make sense, but for people that actually care about their health and take care of themselves, I think you put yourself in a different category, especially if you've had, like I said, a previous reaction, an autoimmune issue or something like that. And so how do you figure you can approach that? I mean, I think, we've clearly seen data showing that people that have been previously infected have very robust immunity, which you would expect. And that's consistent with almost every every infection or viral infection that we've known. I mean, there's a few exceptions to that, but generally that's the case. Do you think common sense and actually real science is going to win out in this? What are your thoughts on this, Rob?
I'm not entirely sure. So I did end up getting COVID back at the end of November, beginning December of last year. And I had a rough couple of days. Like, I got very tired for 3 days leading up to the main event. And then I woke up at maybe 4 a.m. and I had a bad sore throat and I couldn't really get off the couch that day. The day after that, I was maybe 85% back to normal. And then the following week, like, if I did anything kind of cardio related, I could feel it in my lungs. And I definitely had this sense. I was like, man, if I was sick, I could see where that thing would be bad news. Like, I was tired enough that, like, if that degree of fatigue went on for weeks or something, like, I get how it could be a rough day. But, super early in this whole thing, I think it was March 23rd. I've been going back through and looking at the podcast we did, but March 23rd, I made the case that if a vaccine is the singular solution that's on the table here, this doesn't make sense, because at that point there had never been a SARS virus vaccine that was successful. It always ended up killing the animals that they were tested on in the run up when they were tinkering with the SARS-CoV-1 and also the MERS viruses. This new methodology that they're using, the J&J is the adenovirus, and then the Pfizer Moderna is the mRNA. Those are some different techniques that have been used, and they're pretty cool. Like, just from a scientific perspective, it's like, okay, there's something interesting there, but it's been stunning that there was not a full court press to catalog everybody who has had COVID and stick those in the same risk, the same kind of strata as people who had been vaccinated. And interestingly, in Israel, they did exactly this. Like, they tracked the people who had COVID because they didn't want to vaccinate those people right out of the gate. They wanted to get vaccines to their most at-risk populations, kind of like the people you alluded to. They then made it optional for people to get one vaccine dose, not two, because they were really aware of the potential downsides of things like antibody-dependent enhancement, which is this overactive immune response that can occur from both vaccines and from exposure to pathogens, and then particularly when you get the pathogen and then get a vaccine on top of it. And so the approach that Israel did makes a lot of sense to me, and I still wouldn't agree with everything that they've done, but just from a workflow perspective, it really felt a lot more like trying to get on top of this versus like a power grab. And an example that I use is when in World War II, the Manhattan Project, when they were trying to develop an atomic bomb, we were in a race against Nazi Germany, and we didn't know how far along they really were. We didn't know if developing an atomic weapon was even feasible. And so they developed a rather large team and had multiple locations, and they had 3 or 4 different strategies that they were approaching. 2 of the strategies was using uranium versus plutonium, because they weren't sure which one of those routes might work. Maybe one would work and the other one wouldn't work. But they tried lots and lots of different things, and there was really no idea that was too crazy that wasn't at least considered. And then we fast forward to this situation where we have this pandemic, which was presented as like this existential crisis, but instead of being really dynamic and nimble and looking at, like off-label pharmaceuticals, like we've seen some of the statins have shown some remarkable efficacy in mitigating, morbidity and mortality, to say nothing of a bunch of other, unnameable substances at this point. But there should, in my mind, if this had really been something that was about something other than gaining control of people, we should have had this super ambitious, like, data analytics, looking at machine learning, digging into our whole pharmacopoeia to try to figure out if any of our off-label drugs had any efficacy in this story. We should have been, this was an opportunity to full court press the metabolic health of the country. Like hidden in the background of all this stuff, there was a report a few days ago that the expiration date for the funding for both Social Security and Medicare has gotten moved forward like 5 years. Like we are going to be bankrupt from those things by 2026. I think Medicare starts running out of money, 2032, something like that. Social Security starts running out of money. And most of the shortfall that occurs there is from metabolic health driving up prices at an exponential rate. So we had an opportunity to do almost this like John F. Kennedy moon launch thing, where it's like, in 5 years, we will, reverse the metabolic disease of the country, and this will protect us against the coronavirus, and it will also forestall all of these problems that we have with our medical system. And we did nothing with that. What we did is stuck people in their houses, subsidized their ability to order food to their homes, and people, our children are less metabolically healthy this year than they were 2 years ago, So I know I wandered around a lot there, but it's appalling what occurred. And this is also why I've been dragging my heels on so many of these things. Like if somebody asks me to do something onerous, but it all makes sense, I will pretty much like lie down in lava to do this thing. Like I'll be a team player. I'll take one for the greater good, but the boxes need to be ticked. Like this stuff needs to really make a lot of sense for me. But when, the lab leak deal was verboten to talk about, and now it looks like that almost certainly was the deal. And the people who were hiding that also appear to have been the folks that were funding gain of function research. Like I start getting really squirrely about that. Like I start getting to the point where it's like, I'm not going to do a goddamn thing that you guys ask me to do no matter what, even if it makes my life worse. I'm just kind of obstinate that way. And again, I know I'm rambling. Don't know if I actually answered your very good question, but like that's kind of the headspace I have with all this.
Yeah, it's interesting. You turned 50 in January. I turned 55 in January, so I got you basically right at 5 years. But I was
nice.
just, I passed, it's kind of interesting. I passed through China at the very end of 2019. I had a layover in the airport, and I went through there a couple of times, and I literally was sick when I got off the plane. I mean, it was very weird. It was, I didn't think anything at the time, but this was right before this pandemic broke out, and I was profoundly weak in the gym for like a week. I was like, this is very unusual, because I remember before leaving for that trip, I was kicking butt, and I came back and I was like, I'm very depleted. So it's just kind of curious. I should probably test myself, because I don't have any other episodes where I could think that I got sick. So I don't, again, you talk about this lab leak thing, and we probably don't know the exact timing of when this thing got out into the wild. It's probably somewhere in that, I think they're certainly pointing to December of 2019, and perhaps maybe it was even earlier, but I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know if a Chinese airport at the end of 2019 was a place to be or not. Who knows? But so the thing about where we're potentially heading as a society in general. And I know you talk. I know you have very libertarian beliefs, I believe. And so a lot of people are saying, well, if we concede and we have these vaccine passports, and we're going to sort of put the people into two groups. There's the people that have complied, and those are the unwashed or the non-compliant people. Do you see any problems with these sort of tracking devices or anything like that? What is the potential for problems with that?
Man, that is literally like running up and just taking a dump on the punch bowl and then like running away. Like that's yeah, I mean, it's kind of every Orwellian Aldous Huxley, like it's kind of every dystopian horror that you could imagine. And the genius of it all is it's all couched in health. We're doing this to save lives. We're doing this, you should do your part, doc, because you not being vaccinated, even if you had the thing back in December, and even if your natural immunity is 27 times greater than the vaccine immunity, you should do your part for the greater good. And it is fascinating to me how many folks are willing to sign up for that type of scenario, and the danger that one danger that I see is that some people will end up pushing back, and they'll end up pushing back in a pretty significant and violent way. And I don't think it's too controversial a statement to say that there are a lot of people, both internal and external to the United States, that would love to see us in some degree of like civil unrest, like that there's just all kinds of people that would love to see that. And I wasn't a bully as a kid, but there were a few times that some kids would get on my nerves, and I was crafty enough that I could shit talk these people into doing something that would then justify me punching them in the nose. And this whole thing feels like trying to provoke a violent response. Like, this feels like getting bullied so that then somebody reacts, and then when you react, you're labeled as an extremist. And so I just see this thing as, if we do roll over and don't do anything, then I think that's really terrible, because this is straight out of like the social credit score stuff that's in China. And I mean, if you want to open a business, if you want to run a business, if your children want to go to a good university and you have a poor social credit score because the government feels that you haven't been a good member of the community, then you're kind of hosed. Like, you are out of luck. And this is what this stuff is ultimately going to get linked to. And I was warning about this stuff close to 10 years ago, that the food system was going to get tied into the kind of social justice movement, climate change, and then lo and behold, COVID emerged, and now all of that stuff is woven together in this really crazy Orwellian way. So, like, even one of the things that's been crazy for me is that the folks whose lives have been changed for the better with the some flavor of ancestral eating, whether it's carnivore or basic paleo or whatever, but access to animal proteins being like this really critical feature of what their experience is. And they are incapable of recognizing that this whole movement is trying to change our access to healthcare, our access to food. It's being sold that the way that we raise animals is the cause of this coronavirus because of climate change. And it sounds good. I sound like a crazy person describing it, because it's actually crazy, because I'm describing craziness. So you sound crazy by default, but and the one benefit here, Doc, like you asked if we could pop out the other side of this, the interesting thing, the genius of folks tying all this stuff together is that if you push, so I had a friend that I cited in my first book, The Paleo Solution. She helped me edit this book, and really, we were pretty tight for a number of years. And then there was an article that appeared in the website physics.org. So it's a website devoted to physics research. And there was a piece that was talking about methane release from shellfish. And it was talking about how these shellfish beds just produce absolutely monumental amounts of methane. And what the paper was suggested two things. One, we may need to really reevaluate our perspective of greenhouse gases and climate change, because there may be a lot more happening from the biogenic side, from the life side of this, than what we had ever appreciated. And then the other side of this was that maybe we need to go out and start eradicating shellfish to mitigate climate change. And it just, like, my head almost exploded. We're going to destroy life to protect life. This doesn't make sense. But I posted this thing and I said, this is why we need a nuanced discussion around climate change. And this friend of mine popped up and she was like, well, what do you mean a nuanced discussion? I said, well, we need a nuanced discussion, because if we go crazy tackling, if greenhouse gases are terrible across the board, period, and we discovered that there is just monumental amounts of greenhouse gases being emitted from living systems, then people are going to do dumb things like suggesting that we eradicate shellfish. There was a bill in the Swedish parliament suggesting that their moose population should be dramatically reduced because the moose eat lichen and they produce greenhouse gases. It is crazy. But so it's powerful in that. So what this person ended up suggesting, she said, well, people that I've met who have any pushback about the standard climate change narrative, I've also noticed that they tend to be Holocaust deniers. And now I've been friends with this person for over 10 years. I know she's Jewish. I am not a Holocaust denier, but she, you know, she went there immediately. And so it's a really powerful technique to tie these climate change issues, health issues, and kind of social justice issues together in a way that if you push back on one thing, then you may be talking about like animal husbandry being important to mitigate desertification. And before you know it, you are being sold as like a Holocaust denier or something like, and it's really easy for people to do this stuff. And it's been powerful so far, but it's also when you tie all that stuff together, and I would make the case, you know, when you're lying about these things, when reality doesn't comport with the message being given, it might be easy to decouple or break all that stuff. Like because they have been playing this kind of underhanded game in this way, it's also possible that if we get a wedge in the door and start prying this thing open and we can decouple this stuff, it might be possible to really turn the whole thing around. But I mean, the White House was just kind of bragging about the fact that they're working with the tech companies to make sure that health disinformation is you know, properly censored. And so it's not even like it's not even a hidden, you know, for a long time, people would make the case, well, these are private companies, they can kind of do what they want to. And that looked really dubious. But now it's pretty clear that these tech platforms are kind of a mouthpiece for the government. And I don't know, does that end up being a deal where we can't buy groceries unless we have, you know, particular tech, you know, anointed, you know, passport thing? Do our bank accounts get canceled because we don't have a you know, current vaccine booster on record, or we can't access our money? And that's where I think that things potentially get very, very dangerous, and it could go to a very bad spot. And, you know, today is going to be, to your point, an interesting and pivotal day in this whole story. Like, if historians are able to talk about this at all, this pandemic and today, it will likely be some really important pieces to that whole thing.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, I suspect they will probably try to restrict travel for people that are unvaccinated. They'll probably mandate maybe school or other, you know, just sort of some of the things you're already seeing in some of the states, like California, the state I'm in, Washington. You know, I think they'll probably come up with a national mandate to some to that degree. And I think there'll be a lot of pushback, and you might get a lot more people moving to Montana and Texas and Florida, where the governors say we're not going to follow these national mandates. And then does that eventually escalate? Do we start talking about secession at some point? I don't know. I mean, you know, you could see that playing out very, very, very likely. I mean, I think there's enough people that are pissed off by this whole thing. I thought, you know, one of the things that you had mentioned about, you know, we've got tracking who is vulnerable to what, and I think this is still an important part of this discussion. You know, when it comes to kids, you know, there's been, I think, 450-ish children, I guess kids under 18 or so, that have died with COVID-19, you know, because of, in association with, you know, it's still kind of murky. And we still don't have a handle on the comorbidities on those kids. And so we're still not, you know, like I said, does that apply to all children equally, or are these kids that have leukemia or type 2 diabetes? And I think, you know, the fact that we are not, that information isn't transparent. I'm sure people know. They've got to know. You know, if they've got a death report, the kid was in a hospital, and they have to know what the comorbidity is. And the fact that we are not sharing that data, to me, is, I think, a huge disservice.
It's telling. It's super telling. Yeah. Why would you not want that data? Like, we love data, and we, you know, with EMRs and all this stuff, like, it's super easy to aggregate and put that stuff together. And why on earth wouldn't we want to know that stuff unless it potentially paints the narrative in an unfavorable way? Like, that's the only way that I could think of that you wouldn't want that data.
Yeah, I want to point out, I saw, and maybe this is still new information, or maybe you've seen it. There, I guess there's a fourth vaccine company, I think Novavax, and I don't remember the company, but that's the name of the vax. And they've got it's basically just a spike protein isolate, and it's got some kind of carrier, but it's not inducing the body to make it. So it's just exposure to the antigen, almost like a dead vaccine, like a dead virus sort of. And that might be for those people that are deciding, hey, I'm going to get this. There may be at least some degree of comfort in the fact that, this is kind of older technology and that you're just being exposed to the antigen rather than having your actual cells make it. And
Right.
I'm told, that the vaccine, the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines hang around for a week or two, and then they shut down and they're no longer doing that. Although there's other data out there from autopsy that says, wait a minute, maybe we're getting more of this spike protein made than we thought, and it's showing up in other areas. And so, who's selling the, it's hard to get the right information on this stuff.
Right.
So there's something else. And I don't know if you've heard of this Novavax. Have you heard of that one recently?
Yeah. And it's definitely intriguing. The bastard to me in all this is that it's crystal clear whether you're talking about known vaccine problems or the coronavirus itself, is the spike protein is like the toxic constituent. Like it is the main thing that's, causing like this out of control immune enhancement. It seems to lead into all kinds of thrombic events and whatnot. The changes in the epithelial cells within the heart to be in kind of a pro-thrombic state. So this Novavax thing is interesting, but it's also if the spike protein there is open and exposed to the body, and everything is a risk reward trade-off, right? Like I would say if somebody is immunocompromised and maybe not super healthy, like probably doing any one of these vaccines is probably going to be safer in the long run versus catching the virus itself, unless you've been able to wait long enough. And typically what viruses do, if they run long enough, they get more and more transmissible, but less and less deadly as time goes along. So you may just bide your time until you feel like, okay, this thing's not that big of a deal. But there's always risk reward stories there, but the bugger is that the really gnarly part of COVID or the vaccine is that spike protein itself. Like that thing seems to be the primary generator of toxicity and immunological problems. And that's been the whole focus of the vaccine technology. So it's kind of a bummer in that regard. And it also, Gert Vandenbosch's work suggesting that vaccinating amidst a pandemic, and in particular, having it be just the spike protein, it really sets up this beautiful evolutionary bottleneck for iterations to start working around that. And I think that we're seeing examples of that. And part of what Gert suggested is that we would see lots more variants, which we are tending to see that. And we would also tend to see more children getting sick. We would see populations that historically have not been as affected. And we see a little bit of that, but I would also push back on that a little bit. All of our kids generally are less healthy than what they were before. So I don't know if it's because we're spinning off these evolutionarily novel variants or because our kids are generally less well. And there was some suggestion that exposure to any type of coronavirus is just the common cold conferred some degree of protection here. And when kids are in school and they're running around doing things, I mean, they tend to get like on average, like one cold per 6 weeks throughout most of the year. So maybe part of their greater susceptibility now is that they're getting less of this exposure to the common cold because of, staying home and all that. So the bugger though, I think circling back to your point, is that all of this data exists, and we're in this time where we can crunch data like we've never been able to in history, but yet it's nowhere to be found. It's like the Three Stooges, like trying to pickpocket each other. Like you have no idea what's going on here, in this data that should be really easily at hand is just nowhere to be found.
Yeah, you pointed out Israel's at least more scientific approach, and again, I think I saw the Israel health minister talking about booster number 4 already, and so they're talking about we've got some. I think they rolled out 2.5 million number 3s, and now they're already onto the number 4, and so there's some point where you wonder if this does become endemic and it becomes less virulent and kind of like the seasonal flu or seasonal common cold. Are we still going to be in this hyper vaccination state where we're putting out these kind of draconian things where we're banning people from this and that. You think it's just going to be, once it's in place, it'll always be in place, and even if there's no credible real threat in the level of pathogen in the population is extremely low and not a big deal, and it's not overwhelming the system, they're still going to be requiring, you need to check out at the grocery store, you need to scan your card that says you've been vaccinated. You think that's still going to be in place if it gets in place?
The only way I see that not really happening now is if there is, say, like this antibody dependent enhancement where serial exposures to the vaccine produces this massive over response in the immune system, and people start dying more from being vaccinated than, like the unvaccinated groups getting the vaccine, the virus. That's kind of the only way that I see this getting walked back, or some people really, a country like Sweden or Denmark or maybe Israel, somewhere they're like, okay, enough's enough. Too many civil liberties are gone. We're taking away too much in the name of security. But I mean, the pendulum is swinging hard that direction. It's definitely swinging very hard in this heavily authoritarian kind of way. What I've been kind of amazed by is that there haven't been that many yet good alternatives, but that have popped up, both with regards to like social media and different, institutional routes. The number of kids that are in homeschool more than doubled in the United States. So there was a baseline level of about 2 million kids, and now it's north of 5 million kids. So like people are pulling their kids out of school. So maybe that's a point of leverage, like that ends up having really significant impacts on zoned school tax bases and not having kids in the schools. But I don't know, like I'm optimistic in that I think that we will see some light at the end of some tunnel, but it's liable to be a really long slog to get through this, because again, like government generally is tied really tightly with old media and social media, and there is this just powerful, consistent message that you need to do this, and if you don't do it, now they've been doing a few carrots, go get a vaccine and get a Krispy Kreme, go get a vaccine and maybe win, be entered to win some money in the lottery, and they've abandoned the carrot and now they're going to the stick. It is just kind of a question of like how draconian they choose to get on that stick side of this thing to motivate people.
Yeah, the beatings will continue until morale improves or something like that. It's one of those deals there. Hey, let me ask you, how long have you been up in Montana, and what's the climate like? And I mean, I don't mean the weather climate, but the sense of, society climate in Montana. Is it pretty much like normal in Montana, or what's it like there?
It's pretty darn normal. We've been here 6 months. If you get to some of the hoitier areas like Whitefish, and also, in their defense, they're more, Kalispell has a fair amount of tourist throughput, but Whitefish definitely has a lot more. Like it's really a destination location for that. But when we moved here in March, they had just rolled back the mask mandates in the state, and we got our gear moved into the house, and then there was a little burger place up the street, and we walked in and none of the staff had masks on, and our kids were like, this is awesome, and even in Texas, when we sat outside at the Mexican restaurant we would go to, like we had to wear a mask walking through, and the staff wore a mask and everything. If you got to rural areas, that didn't really happen. Like our jiu-jitsu gym is a pretty good example. Like they closed for like 8 weeks, and then they ping the everybody that was signed up at the gym, and they're like, listen, what our thought is this, which is we all take personal responsibility and some degree of risk doing this, and we feel like opening back up. And if you would like to come, we would love to have you. If you don't want to come, we will continue billing you. But when you do come back, we will add those months onto the back of your contract. If you want a gym, like we need to do this to stay open, and I think it was like 98% of people were like, no, I'm ready to train him. You're just, if somebody feels like they've got a tickle in their throat and they've got a cold or something, like they just don't go. I think people are even a little bit more conscientious about that. Whereas before, people might be like, well, I'm feeling a little off, but I want to, I've got a competition in 2 months. And so I want to get in and train. And so people are more conscientious about it. But people, I think, are just very honest and real in their risk assessment. And also, I would say by and large, like that is a generally healthier cross section of people. Like people are, not everybody eats great in there, but they're doing hard exercise multiple times a week. And because it is hard, you want to do better. And so I've found jujitsu to be a great way to perk people's ears up about eating better, because after you get the crap beat out of you for 2 hours, you're like, okay, I want some of those beatings to be a little bit better. And so it really motivates you to do something different. But by and large, it's been very reasonable. And again, if you get to more touristy areas, we tended to see more masks. You see more people wearing masks of their own accord and stuff like that, which even within that story, like if somebody feels like their risk profile is such that they would benefit from wearing a mask, then God love them. If they want a hug from me, I'll give them one. If they just want a virtual high five, I'll send it to them across the room. But I would say by and large, people have been reasonably sane about this. And we were lucky going both from Texas to Montana. Like we have friends at, California, New York, New Jersey. I will say that the Element company was based out of New York, and virtually our whole team has fled New York. Like they were in Manhattan, and the leasing agency that we had to beg our way into getting a spot there 2 years ago. They were begging us to keep a presence in there just so it would look like there was anybody in the building at that time. So the world has definitely changed a lot. And my only hope is that people fleeing these really totalitarian areas remember why they left, and hopefully they don't screw everything up everywhere else that they're going, because like Montana only has 1 million person population. It would be really easy to scuttle that whole ship with some, kind of squirrely, poor thinking. So yeah, fingers crossed on that.
Yeah, I think the maybe the 2024 electoral map might look very different. There may be, California might have 4 or 5 less electoral votes, and Montana might have an extra one or something like that. Who knows? I mean, I guess it's based on senators, but I mean for the House or something like that. It's kind of interesting with that. One of the things I was going to say, when I started jiu-jitsu, I started at the headquarters at Gracie Baja in Irvine, California, and just in the beginning, I remember they wanted us to stand outside 6 feet apart to check in. And then I'm like, well, I'm going to go in there. I'm going to literally have another guy's body laying across my mouth in about 10 minutes. This is kind of, I think everybody there, they knew they were doing it just to posture, just for for show outside. But it has gotten, obviously with the restaurant stuff, it's, the absurdity of you can stand up in a restaurant, be at risk, but when you're sitting down at your table, you're suddenly protected. I mean this, this whole herd immunity redefined as only vaccine and no longer natural immunity. I mean, everybody's seeing this and saying this is just absolutely, why is there skepticism? If we're seeing this clear, lack of transparency and completely nonsensical stuff, and people are asking why is there hesitancy? I think that's as big of a reason as anything else. If it was, like I said, if the argument stood on its own and the data supported it, I think most reasonable people say, yeah, I'm pretty on board with this stuff. But the fact that there's been so much mixed messaging, flat out, perhaps deceptive stuff, lack of transparency, and I think you've got just a perfect mixture for a lot of doubt. And I think that's what we're seeing for sure.
Yeah.
All right, Rob. Well, we've gone through an hour. It's been great talking. I'm going to try to get up to, I know I've got some friends that have a place up in, I think in Montana, I guess in Big Sky. I'm not sure how far that is from Kalispell, but
it's about 5 hours and we get down there. So we could meet you there. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, it'd be fun to see sometimes. But anyway, Rob, take care. And I will say, I really appreciate the Element stuff. I think that's been a really good product. I find that I get a little monthly stash from you guys, and I go through it. And like I said, tell us a little bit about the Element stuff before you go, just so people aren't familiar with it.
Just an electrolyte if you need a good electrolyte, which a lot of folks seem to benefit from additional sodium intake, particularly if they're high motor athletes. If you don't need an electrolyte, then it makes an amazing margarita or other drink base. So if you want a good margarita base, then Element kicks ass on that too. So it's either for health or it's for boozing. Either way, yeah.
Yeah, I often I'll just take it. I'll throw a little pack in there, and I'll throw a couple cups of ice in there, a little bit of water, blend it up, and it's like it's almost like a sorbet.
Yeah,
and it's a nice little thing there. So it's a really good thing.
awesome.
And how do folks find your Healthy Rebellion Radio? I think is what you call it. Where do they find you on social media? While you're still, I don't know if you're shadow
while
banned.
still there. If folks go to robbwolf.com, they can usually track everything down from there. Yeah.
Rob, have a great day.
Thanks
for doing what you're doing. Keep up the good work. And rest of you guys, we'll see you guys tomorrow. Okay.
Bye, everybody. Take care.
Guys.
Bye.
Join Revero.health for a 30-day free trial to get access to live Q&A with VIP guests, social community meetings, member discounts, low-carb healthcare providers list, forum, workouts, monthly challenges, early access to podcasts, recipes, carnivore diet guide, fasting guide, shred guide, and much more.